Welcome to the Lost Boys and Found Fathers podcast. I'm Gabriel O'Sullivan, and joining me is my co-host and friend, Will Haycox. We are men who have suffered the loss of a child, and through this production, we desire to offer encouragement, strength, and hope to our fellow brothers who have traveled the same journey. Good morning, Will.
Good morning, Mr. Gabe.
So we are coming to you live and direct on this beautiful morning. So we don't know what time you're listening to it, but we appreciate you guys joining us. Today on the Lost Boys and Found Fathers podcast, we're going to work through Ephesians 6, 10 through 13 in particular. Well, actually 10 through 20 is going to be the total breadth of this series. And just a great passage of Scripture where Paul is giving us some encouragement about us putting on, as we would call it, the armor of faith, right? And the whole armor of God. And there's a reason that we think this is important is because, you know, we recognize that as men there are things that we've got to do to help us to be strong for the day. Even if you haven't necessarily gone through like a tough time in your life, like this show generally speaks to, which most people have, and if you haven't, you probably will, because that's just, as Prince says, the thing called life. Okay, I always want to bring up Prince in every episode,
love it.
If we can.
If you haven't listened to us last time, I think we also had a Hulk Hogan reference. So
we did. Hulk Hogan, Ozzy Osbourne.
That's
yes. Our shows are trending in Ozzy Osbourne searches and Hulk Hogan searches.
Sure we are, yeah.
So that's pretty amazing right there. I did see we were listened to in South Africa this week, and then also somewhere in the Middle East was one of our shows. So that was pretty cool.
That's cool.
So yeah, that was neat. So we want to make sure that we're doing our part and that we're putting on this armor of God, and we're going to get to kind of what that looks like here in these episodes. And so we're going to call this standing firm in the aftermath, the armor of God for men who mourn. But I would just like to say this is also just the armor of God for men, period. Like we could just leave it at that, because there's going to be applicable things that we talk about in these few episodes here that need to apply to our lives every single day, no matter if you've gone through a difficult time or not. And so we're going to look at this again, Ephesians 6, 10 through 20. And I'm going to read a little bit here first. It says, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." And then one more verse right here for this morning. "Therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand." And then we'll kind of get into what those different pieces are. But, you know, we got to recognize Paul was writing this from prison. And so he's obviously very familiar with what armor looks like, because I'm sure he was taken into custody by these soldiers that had a lot of this stuff on. And he's like thinking, wow, I could use this as an object lesson. And, you know, who knows? We're actually recording from my kid's playroom. And there's lots of different armor and shields and swords and helmets and stuff in this room right here that we might
worn some.
Yeah, we might. That's right. We might break out as an object lesson right here. But what we want to remind ourselves of, and the kind of this passage opening up speaks to, is that, you know, our strength, daily strength, doesn't have to be just self-generated. Like there's things that we need to do, and we're going to talk about that. But it could be drawn, it needs to be drawn from God's power, like living in us and living through us, especially if we go through a really difficult time, but just every day in general. And so, Will, you got anything to, as we kind of open this series up, about, you know, maybe a personal story, an anecdote, not an antidote, like I haven't been...
He's got the antidote.
I haven't been stung by a bee or anything like that, but... like why has this passage been important to you through your life, and, you know, particularly through the last 6-7 years?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things that pops into my mind there is It's kind of like the garbage in, garbage out idea that, what you're filling your mind and your heart with is what you're going to start thinking about, what you're going to start dwelling on, and it's going to influence, your thoughts. It's going to influence your actions. And so this may not be exactly what you're getting at, but I'm going to bring it back around. I remember, I want to say it was, I think it was the year we lost our son. It may have been, it was before we lost our son. But I was in a rough place mentally. I told that story before. And I had been for a long time listening to these like murder mystery podcasts and stuff like that. And I think the podcast was Sword and Scale or something like that. And it was a really interesting podcast. There's a lot of details in there. There's a lot of, some stories you've heard of, like Charles Manson, and some other stories you may not have heard of. And I think at first I was just fascinated, and I was telling myself, like, I just want to learn these stories, and I want to expose myself, I was kind of bathing it in this righteous attitude. I want to expose myself to the depths of evil, that people can go to, so that I know, how depraved everything is, and I can love people better. I can know the reality of the fight we're in. But I started realizing after listening to that podcast pretty much every day for, I don't even know, excuse me, 6 months or longer, I was just frustrated, and I was angry all the time, and I was, I started like taking in, I guess, the evil of how terrible people could be to each other, just horrible things, the most horrible things you can imagine. That's what this podcast was describing in detail, like basically reading the police report kind of detail.
Yeah.
And I got to a point where I was just, I don't think I remember having like nightmares or anything like that. It was just like this general outlook of humanity. Like, man, humanity's terrible. Like we're awful. They do terrible things to each other. No, there is no good. There's nothing, nothing worth writing home about. And I want to bring that around to say, like, what I had to do was stop listening to it. And I just, at a certain point, I was talking to my wife. I was just like, you know what, this isn't good for me. I'm thinking about this terrible stuff all the time. Mm-hmm. And the only way I know to change it is to stop listening to it. And I stopped listening to it. And I'd already been reading through the Bible, but I wanted to reinforce that. So I went over and switched to listening to a chronological reading of the Bible every day in that time that I was listening to the podcast. And I feel like within a couple of weeks, like everything changed. It was like my whole mindset. I was more loving to my wife. I was more gentle. I was seeing the good in people rather than, seeing the, almost not quite looking for reasons to fight, but, like just expecting the worst, believing the worst about everybody. And so I want to bring that back around to your point that, it's almost like I was taking my armor off and then standing in front of a volley of arrows and just like letting the arrows just hit me over and over and over and over again. And I was allowing the enemy's almost glorification of evil. And I wouldn't quite say he was glorifying. He wasn't saying it was good in that podcast, but it was just over and over and over again, just talking about it and putting it in your head. And so I was doing kind of the opposite of what we're talking about in this podcast, that instead of filling my mind with the things of the Lord and putting on my armor, I was pushing those things away and just inviting in discussion of evil over and over. And I felt like, the part of me resisted putting that podcast down because I was thinking, I'm a guy. I should be strong enough to hear this. This is a reality. This is something that really happened in the world. Some of them happened like 5 years before I was listening to the podcast. It was like contemporary. It's not like we're talking about stuff from the 1800s. And part of me was saying, if I'm a man, if I can deal with the realities of the world, I should be able to listen to this, no problem. And it was almost like humiliating in my mind. Part of me, the lies of the enemy was saying, "Oh yeah, you got to keep listening to this because if you wuss out and you stop listening to it, you're not a real man. You're not strong enough." And I think turning that around, turning that on its head when we're talking about this armor of God, the strength that we have doesn't come from I'm a man, I'm strong, or I work out, I'm strong. I come from this society or that society and I've been made strong. My parents were tough on me and I became strong. Like your strength comes from the Lord. And just like a soldier gets his protection from armor in battle, we get our strength and our protection from the spiritual armor that the Lord gives us.
Man, absolutely. I think that's why Paul, like you brings up immediately, he says, "Be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power." Right. So it's not just us. Again, pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, or like you said, thinking, "Oh, I'm tough. I can do this," or yeah, we want to have some confidence in ourselves, obviously, and we want to believe in ourselves and believe that we can get through stuff. But again, it's like, do we really want? If we want to be stronger, okay, why not pull from the power that created you? Why not pull from the power that's sustaining the universe? And that would be, just being strong in God and in His mighty power. And a reason it says that is because so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. So the word scheme, right, is not a favorable word, right? We're reading that and we're knowing like, okay, this is someone trying to trick us. This is someone trying to pull one over on us. And you read through Scripture, like that is definitely kind of the devil's modus operandi. Like the Bible even says he will go around disguising as an angel of light. And we see him from the get-go, right, from Genesis, and then even in Job, like looking for ways to like thwart us and to come against us and to hurt us because he hates us. He wants us to suffer like he's going to suffer forever. And he came against God, he's coming against us. And so God's recognizing like, hey, I've given you this opportunity, to take a stand, but you're going to be better suited if you take this stand with me and with help from me. Because your enemy is out there trying to get you. He goes on to say, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. So, like, here's the thing. Like, yes, we're going to go through difficult times. Yes, you might, we talk about, again, obviously child loss on this and helping guys get through that. There's other hard things that you're going to go through in your life. And you might just be thinking, oh, these are just things of the world. Like, these are worldly things that I'm having to deal with. But in their root, they're not, because, again, if it's something that's causing you tremendous anguish or pain or discomfort or, some type of anxiety or depression, then those are things that, like, you may have brought them on yourself through some stuff that you've been doing. A lot of times it's not. It's just that the devil's trying to sift you, right? He's got this desire, like he did Job, to take you down. And you got to recognize that. And so if we recognize that, hey, this isn't, if it's not your own doing, meaning that if you're not, if you're deciding that you're going to have a meth lab in your house and that you're going to also utilize of those drugs every day, or you're like, instead of spending time with my wife, I'm going to cheat on her. Like, if you're bringing that stuff into your own life and doing those dumb things that are self-destructive, well, okay, you're bringing on that pain, that punishment. But if you're trying to live a godly life and your heart is for the Lord and for your family, and some stuff comes against you, you got to recognize, like, all right, this is like evil trying to get to me. Now, obviously, God has the ability to. He's the one that's allowing that. And why would God allow that? Well, God would allow that because He believes that you have the capacity with His help to get through it. He's also wanting to help make you stronger, right? We talked about it a couple weeks ago. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you face trials of many kinds, because we know that the testing of our faith develops perseverance. But that being said, that testing of our faith is a test, right? And so we got to be ready for that test when it comes.
Yeah, there's so many different things, different directions I want to take that. I'd say one, trying to stay on the path you made for us here with these notes, Gabe.
Yeah.
You talked about Paul being in prison and writing from prison, writing, in the context that he's experiencing. He's not only in prison, but he's writing to people who are currently suffering persecution. And I'm not. You guys know, if you listen to this podcast, I do like history. I'm not the best on like every single date and knowing exactly when this happened and that happened. There's certain periods of history that I'm more familiar with than others.
When was the Spanish Armada?
Spanish Armada was like,
come on,
1590s, maybe
so
something like that.
1588.
1588. Hey, that was a pretty good guess.
You know what?
Pretty great guess.
Thank you, Billy Madison.
Billy Madison. I love it.
There you go.
Hey, that was a good guess. I haven't thought about Spanish Armada in a long time.
That was good.
I'm proud of myself.
I'm proud of you too, Will.
So, completely unrelated. Sorry, guys. As I say, let's not get derailed. But no, so I just want to point out, like, spiritually embattled people is what you have here. And I think that's true of the people he's writing to here in the book of Ephesians. He's writing to people in Ephesus. And those people, we've talked about it in our church. We talked about it. We're going through Revelation in our church. And one of the churches that we're discussing is Ephesus and really churches in that whole area. And talk about like the pagan worship, and what these people were going through was essentially that even if people were Jewish, even if people were Asiatic religions, whatever their beliefs were, they were expected to, almost like the emperor worship idea in the Roman Empire. They were expected to add the worship of the Roman Empire's gods to what they were doing, and it was part of life. It was a thing that you were basically expected to do, or you were either put in prison, killed, ostracized, lost your place in society, all these different outcomes that happen at different times and different places there. But these people were facing real persecution by other people, and something that I want to mention because I struggle with this, and I'm sure other guys do. What he's saying here in verses, my iPad keeps going to sleep, but what he's saying here in verses like 11, 12, where he's saying 12, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. I would not take that to say people are innocent. People are never your enemy, quote unquote.
Right.
But I would also say, when you read this, when you think about Paul's context, when you think about our context, whether it's wars that we're in today, World War II, struggles that you're in, if you've gone through a divorce and your spouse is fighting you tooth and nail, trying to take custody, trying to take this or that, it would be easy to say that person is bad, that person is evil, they are all wrong. And I would say that most of what humans do is influenced in some way by the devil. By most of the bad things that humans do is influenced by the devil, influenced by some demonic power. And I think we're talking about, last week we talked about war and pestilence and famine and things like that at our church. And that's one of the signs of the end times. And I'm not saying that we're necessarily in the end times now, but we're in this place where war has been released, has been allowed to ravage the earth, and so humans are being corrupted and sent out to do the will of the devil, and they are being spiritually empowered, if you want to say it that way, to do the will of the devil and to fight and make life hard for Christians and for good in the world. And so by the same token, we need to be empowered by the good, like you said here at the very beginning, verse 10, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. And then it goes down to verse 12 I just read, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against all these different things. And so if you grew up in church, you've probably heard multiple times, spiritual warfare. You're familiar with what that term at least is used to say. But I would say, like losing a child is like if you're going back to like World War One, you're getting a little closer to the stuff I remember well. I remember well. I've been taught well. I was not alive in World War One. I carry it really well. Um, so like no man's land is this idea of like there's two trenches, and no man's land was where, back in the 1800s, there was the whole different type of warfare where you had cavalry, you had like charges on the enemy's position, and you would try to fight over to their position. Once you took their position, they would all run. You'd kill as many as you could while they were running, and they would push back and set up, and they would reestablish a base somewhere, and then you'd try to push them again. And they tried that in World War One, and it worked terribly. It didn't work at all because of advances in machine guns and chemical warfare and all this stuff. But when I think of grief and losing a child, it's almost like you're abandoned there in no man's land, that you feel like you're in between, if you're looking at the sides of a battle as good and evil, you're in between good and evil. You feel like good is fleeing from you. You feel like God hasn't been near to you in losing your child and dealing with your grief, and he's just left you out there all alone. You feel like the enemy on the other side may be trying to raid that no man's land, trying to go over the top and attack, and is getting closer and closer. And your job in that moment is to try to crawl back to the right side, that you're crawling back towards the Lord. You're screaming, asking for help. And that's hard because like right out there in no man's land, if you've ever seen movies like All Quiet on the Western Front, as a old movie, it's like an old silent movie, but if you've seen some of these movies, like no man's land is just like despair. You're completely isolated, you're angry, you're shocked. And I feel like that's where we are when we lose our child, is we're out here stuck in the middle, stuck in this lonely, desperate place. And you're not in the trenches. Like let's say you're having you're losing your job and it's tough, but you're down there in the trenches with your family, with your children, and you're fighting. You can walk back behind the lines, if I'm going to continue the metaphor, and try to find the general that's God. You can try to find him, you can get direction. But if you're out there in no man's land, if you've lost your child and you're completely isolated, at that point the only option you have is to call for help and wait for help. And so I think that's what we need to be doing in this moment is, we're calling, we're seeking for the armor of God. And the next point you have there, Gabe, and I'll keep with the same metaphors, why standing is harder than moving on. And you say, it's because holding on is difficult when it feels like every instinct is to run. Again, going back to a battle, nowadays we use drones and we use missiles and we use all these long-range weapons. But for thousands of years, two groups lined up on either side, and whether they did the British idea that we think is silly now, where they all just stood in line and shot at each other and just basically waited until one side decided to charge the other. For hundreds and thousands of years, two sides lined up, they fought, they came together and they fought. And your job, if you're the defensive army, is to stand your ground there, and the attacking army may overwhelm you with force, and your instinct is to run. But the movie that comes in my head now is like The Patriot. When they start running, you're defenseless at that point. Your fellow men are the shield that you have around you, that you're all standing together, you're all fighting together, you're all facing the enemy head on, and you may be losing that battle in the moment, but you're continuing to fight, you're continuing to put up some resistance. And the moment that you cut and run, now you've turned your back to the enemy, so you're making yourself way more vulnerable. And a lot of times when armies would flee, depending on the conflict, the attacking army would just chase these people down and just slaughter them. There's no defense at that point. There's no no fear for the attacking army. They would just press the assault and just completely wipe out the defending army that's now fleeing. But you're also leaving those around you unprotected, because you're your job is to, protect your land that you're on. And if you give up and turn around, now the flanks of the soldiers beside you is exposed. And so you're losing the ground that you were tasked to protect, and also making it more difficult on those around you when you give up and you're no longer standing for what's right. So to take that back to us and away from 17th, 18th century warfare, when we are, say you're married, you have a child, you've lost that child, when you are fighting every day, when you're waking up, and I'll throw it to you, Gabe, about some morning mindset and things like that, whether you want to hit that in this episode or the next. But when you're waking up and you're preparing for that battle, and you're starting your day off with the grit and the determination that I'm going to do the right thing, I'm going to fight for what's mine, I'm going to protect my family, I'm going to protect my mind, and I'm going to focus on the Lord, using the Lord's strength, you're waking up ready for that fight, and you're waking up knowing that there's going to be spiritual warfare, and you're ready to face it. But if you're waking up over and over and over again, rolling out of bed with no plan, going through the day, and like says here in Ephesians 12, the enemy, the power of the air, the spiritual forces, the demonic forces, the heavenly realm are all fighting you, and you're just going about your day, just letting them, like the idea of like the darts of the evil one, just filling you up, and you're just like, cool, yeah, that hurts, but I'm just going to go about my day. At that point, not only are you hurting yourself, but you have opened up a door, you literally, let's say you've opened the door to your house, and you just walked away from it, and you let the bad guys come in. Mm-hmm. So at that point, you're hurting yourself, and you're hurting the rest of your family. You're hurting your whole community because you've given up the fight.
Yeah, and that's not who we want to be as men. Like we want, like it says in verse 11, he says, so that you can take your stand. And then verse 13, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you've done everything to stand. So he's painting this picture of standing your ground and fighting, right? And like you said, well, I think it's really important that we mention these morning routines to help us attack the day, so that way the day's going to attack you, but you're prepared to stand against the attack of that day, so that way you're not letting the day happen to you, you're happening to the day. Okay, and there's some things that we've got to do about that. I'm going to get into that real quickly. A cool story about no man's land. My wife's grandfather, he was telling me a story about, he was in World War II. He went in early. He said he got his dad to let him go in at like 16 years old. It was something, like super young, not even 18, maybe might have been 17. I think he said he was 16. And went over to World War II to fight in Europe. And he tells a story about that they were attacking a German location. And he said, we were literally like in a no man's land, running from our position to take this building. He said there was this massive hill, just a field, no trees, no cover. He was like, they were at the building we were taking was at the top of this hill. He said we were having to go up this hill, so super vulnerable position in this field, no cover. He said, and I'm running, and he was like, and then I look around, and he said my machine gunner is not beside me anymore. And I turn around, and I'm like hollering at him, and I look, and he's like 100 yards behind me, laying down in the grass with his gun. And because I guess he just had a rifle, and this guy had automatic weapon. And he said, I ran back to him and laid down. I was like, what are you doing? And he was like, I can't do it. It's too, we're going to get shot. We're going to get killed. We're too vulnerable. There's no cover. And he said, if you don't come up beside me, I'm going to shoot you. He's like, and I'm not playing. He was like, you either come with me right now and we both die together, or we're both going to take this building together, or I'm going to kill you right now. What are you going to do? And he said the guy got up and went with him and started using his automatic weapon. They took the building. Obviously, their groups, their troops succeeded because he's telling me this story. But just the importance of us not laying down, right? Like, don't lay down. Like, we got to be there to fight for ourselves and our family, but also for our brothers that are beside us. Like, we need to be the man that would be strong and be willing to stand and be willing to advance. Just like my wife's grandfather, shout out to Papa Bud. He's with the Lord now. But man, what an amazing man. And so that being said, trying to transition to this morning routines, I tell my boys, you got to have 3 Ds to start your day: devotion, the gym, and detox. Okay, and I'll let you decide what detox means in your life. But I always, I seriously, I think that that's something we need to have, these morning routines and rituals. And so devotion, spending time with the Lord. Some people you like to, I understand some people are morning people, some people are evening people. So you may be like, hey, I like to do my devotion at nighttime, and that's when I'm going to spend the most time with the Lord and do my journaling and extended prayer. Okay, I get that, but I'm going to encourage you, like, at least start your day with prayer, even if it's 3 minutes, 5 minutes, where you're focusing your mind on the Lord and asking for His help and His strength and His guidance for that day, just to get your mind right and get your mind focused on Him. And again, I personally, most mornings get up and have my devotion where I'm actually reading the Bible and spending time with the Lord and journaling. Also, we've talked about it before, I have my time in the morning where I read through what I call positive daily words, which is a list that I've made on my phone of a bunch of positive words that I want my mind to be filled with and thinking about throughout the day, and then a bunch of scripture some great Bible verses that mean a lot to me that I'll read through. That way I'm helping my mind get ready for the day, and then I go to the gym most days. Right, I'm going to the gym, I'm going to work out, I'm going to do some type of workout. Try to do that 5 days a week, so that way I'm doing something and getting my body, prepared and ready for the day. Also, the older I get, the more it's important for me to get up and get moving, or I just don't feel as good, the rest of the day too. But I think that's helpful to have that kind of morning routine and discipline, because it's getting me ready, for the day. And then again, detox. We don't have to get into that. This is a nutrition podcast necessarily, but those are three easy things that you can do to fill your life up with your morning routine to help you be ready to take your stand. So the gym, devotion, detox. Okay, so the 3 Ds of a good morning. So in closing this episode, we are called to be clothed in God's strength, so that way we can take our stand against the evil that's going to come our way every day. Doesn't matter if that's child loss or your boss being a jerk to you. Like, there's going to be something coming at you, and we want you to make sure that you're strong in the Lord. And it's not just in your own power, but there are things that you can do within your power to obviously come alongside the strength that we can gain from the Lord. And so in the next couple episodes, we're going to kind of flesh those out. Like, what is the armor of God? What does that look like? And then how do we apply that to our lives? So anything in closing? Good. All right, so make sure you check out us on the socials, and certainly look for my books, where books are sold. Every Little Thing, 6 Small Steps to Perfect Peace, or Thy Will Be Done, Trusting God in the Midst of Suffering, Pain, or Loss. Thank y'all for joining us today. Let's not be lost. Let's be found in Him.